Teachers of Reddit, what's your most NSFW story from your workplace? Got asked what a tidwank was from a tiny nerdy 11-year-old boy whilst trying to teach him about safety on the internet. I told him it wasn't part of the syllabus and that it wasn't suitable to ask me. I have two. The more mild one goes like this. We were teaching a little pseudo class on geology and asked our older kids the name of the supercontinent before it split into 7 continents. Nobody answered, so we were trying to coax them with it starts with a P. And a little 7-year-old just bellows out PENIS. Lesson over. The worst one was in the 3-year-old's class. One little boy whipped his D out and started shouting "I have an erection" at anyone who cared to look. We had to chase him. He was fast for a toddler. Edit. The little boy had a massive fro just like you know who. Just thought I'd put that out there. I was a teacher 2010 to 2015. I was teaching high school at an all-girls school and there was this student teacher from a local university. He was 19 or 20. He was always being a jerk to this one senior at the school. I thought it a bit odd he was always focusing on her. Fast forward a few months and it was post-graduation. I was out at a local bar and look over and see them together there. A co-worker said they had been screwing for the past few months. I asked him how he knew. There was a smaller teacher's lounge in one of the wings of the school. As there weren't normal classes in that wing, it was not frequented and the setup wasn't as nice. He said he popped in there one day and she was down on her knees blowing him. He closed the door and walked away. Not long after, the student teacher found him in his class and asked him what he saw. My co-worker was a bit stunned and said he wasn't sure. The student teacher said that he should keep what he saw to himself or the truth could get twisted against him. He implied the senior would state she was going down on my co-worker and not the student teacher. There were no cameras or anything in that area, so my co-worker decided to keep his mouth shut. My mom is a preschool teacher and here's the best story I heard so far. There was this kid who bit everything. He chewed on toys, walls, teachers, and of course other preschoolers. So one time a kid comes out of the bathroom that is in one corner of the class and his pants are down and of course his woolly is hanging. The second my mom notices the biting kid does too. But he's in the opposite corner of the class. He starts sprinting towards the boy and my mom does the same, but she, being in her 50s, is slower, but closer to the naked kid. She gets there just barely to grab the kid who's just standing there and takes him off the trajectory the biting kid is on with his mouth open and charging like a torpedo. If she didn't get there faster, the kid would probably be scarred for life. That living torpedo is probably around 10 right now and I heard he's normal now. Not me, but a co-worker. Her first year teaching, she had a class of 12th grade students, and they were studying Beowulf. She gave a quiz, and one of the questions was basic vocabulary, asking for the definition of disembowel. When she handed them back, a student raised his hand and said that she'd marked Tommy correct when he said that it involved removing the head, but she'd marked his paper wrong. She said, "Well, if I gave Tommy head, I guess I have to give everyone head." Yeah. She was facing the chalkboard for a while because as soon as the words left her mouth, she knew what happened. Edited to show that she didn't face disciplinary action. She just couldn't face her students for a couple minutes. Not me, but the woman who taught across the hall from me. She was teaching a 9th grade math class and her classroom had those old-fashioned pencil sharpeners that attach to the wall and you turn the lever to sharpen your pencil. One of her students was sharpening her pencil every day during class and seemed to take a long time to do so because each time she would stand at the back of class sharpening her pencil for 2 minutes or so. After a week or so of this, the teacher went to ask if the student needed help sharpening her pencil. Turns out the girl was putting her vaginal up against the pencil sharpener and was using the vibrations to get off in the middle of math class. Well, there was the time little Kevin told his classmate that her drawing looked like an abortion. He then proceeded to go into details when asked what that was. It's when they take a baby out of a mom's stomach and scramble it all up so it dies. Kevin was 7 at the time. I can only imagine what his home life was like. Loads of Kevin stories. Teacher here. Only the other day I had a student come and get me in the playground by holding my hand. They took me briskly to the bathroom and bent over and held onto their ankles. They said nothing but grunted a little. I knew what they wanted. They wanted me to wipe their bum because there was poo smeared everywhere. Duck my life. Subbed at a school years ago. A teacher broke up with a student he'd been statutory raping. She got upset with him and told people they'd been having sex with each other. Then another girl revealed that she'd been having sex with him too. Then a girl who'd graduated the year before said they'd been together as well. And then another. From even earlier. It turned out this teacher, who was coach for one of the girls' sports teams, had been using that team as his own personal harem for over a decade. Finding, grooming and seducing at least a dozen high school girls. The school district paid an unspecified amount of money to a lot of people to have him quietly resign and leave town. Edit. It's depressing how many people read this and ask if I taught at their high school. Because something just like this happened there. This incident was almost 30 years ago in the US Northeast. Had an autistic kid in our class, 2 teachers, myself included, who wasn't potty trained despite being in a class level where he should have been. He hits himself. The other teacher is like TNT. Go get him changed and I'll keep the kids busy. I take him to the bathroom and go to grab his backup pants. The other teacher shrieks because one of the other students is pelting toys at her. I go to take care of that mess. Takes me all of 30 seconds. I come back to autistic boy and he has stripped himself and smeared his it all over the walls. Toilet. Sink. Himself. It's a rit tornado. I almost quit that day. I will take this a different direction. My first week of teaching had its ups and downs. I was teaching a PE class and had a new kindergarten class for the first time. A few minutes into class, a little 5-year-old boy raises his hand. Emma. Counterpart. I have a problem. My PP is really hard right now and I don't know what to do. Holding in every ounce of laughter I had, I told him I was sorry and that we would talk about his problem in a few minutes. Not long after he raises his hand again. Yes. Caleb. Don't worry. It's not a problem anymore. He tells me with the biggest smile on his face. Gotta love teaching elementary. I'm not a teacher. But my aunt is. She has spent her career working with EC kids. Apparently masturbating frequently anywhere. Anytime is a thing with these kids. Particularly the ones with Down syndrome. She has many stories of kids just suddenly start beating it in class. She used to talk about this one particular girl that had DS and was constantly masturbating. They did have a punishment routine for these kids, as they are not dumb and knew right from wrong. But it didn't seem to work with her. She took this kid, and others, to the Special Olympics in China a few years ago and had to have a chaperone assigned to her specifically to keep her from masturbating in public during the events and anywhere else they were. She still managed to rub one out here and there from what my aunt said. EC teachers, I salute you. In high school, we had a beloved teacher and I am still friends with him to this day. However, he viewed taking attendance as a big waste of time, and his class was enjoyable. So kids rarely skipped it. So he'd just give the class a once over and try to notice if anyone was missing. And sometimes kids would yell out that a kid was sick. Well, on this particular day, he marked everyone as present, including a kid that was not in class, as he was busy murdering his uncle. So the teacher had to go to court and say on the record that no, he is not providing an alibi for the student. He's just terrible at attendance. The administration really got on his ass about attendance after that. And he was good about it. For a few years. And then he went back to his old ways. Saying it's very unlikely I'll have another murder during my class. Had a student run up to me and say that someone had been stabbed in the girls' room. Turns out that a 5th grader had started their period. She later got the talk when she got home. Had a kid in 2nd grade caught fingering a 2nd grade girl in the phys ed locker room after school. Apparently they were both from abusive families and they were victims of sexual abuse by their dads. Not the same dad obviously. That's the ducked up part. Both their dads were sexual abusing those kids and they coped by trying sexual stuff on each other at the age of 8. This girl took pictures of her dog eating peanut butter off of her V and then sent it to her boyfriend. He proceeded to share it with the whole school and then the teachers found out. Some kids found the typing programming teacher on Grindr. Catfished him. He sent multiple D-pics that he took on campus to the kids. Police had to get involved. I've told this story several times, but here goes. I was an occasional substitute teacher in the town where I went to college. The band director often requested me to come teach if she was out sick. Since I was a music major and could work with the kids on their parts, get in for a day, and my instructions were to break the kids up by section and have them practice their parts. I spent the next hour listening to a miasma of sounds from woodwinds, brass, strings, etc. but no drumming. If you don't know any drummers, they are always playing or banging on their laps, tables, steering wheels, etc. Curious me goes to investigate the drum room. And I walked in on the token female drummer flashing her breasts to the boys in exchange for money. This kinda isn't my story, but it's still good and NSFW. One time a kid was doing his visiting days at the school. We were a private school with kind of a history of admitting misfits, and during art class was seen by another kid masturbating under the table to completion, then wiping his ejaculate on his t-shirt. When the head of the middle school told his mom about it afterwards, she said, "Oh yeah, that's something he does when he's nervous." Needless to say, it was a hard pass from the admissions office. School maintenance here to come to mind. At one middle school, a boy came running into the office to tell everyone that he saw two people in a stall together in the bathroom and that a girl had been blowing a guy and that the guy had a huge D, but I can't remember what word he said. He didn't use the word dick. At another middle school, a teacher who had a bad case of the flu lost control of her bowels in front of her class. She must have been aware it was coming because the diarrhea started in the middle of the room and there was a huge trail of it from the middle of the room to the hall. We have custodians, but another main guy and I were close by, so we cleaned it up. I felt bad for her. She went home but was back a few days later and stayed for the rest of the school year. I'm sure there are more stories. Been doing this for 20 years now. A prof of mine recently told me a story about a student of his who gave him a flash drive to hand in an assignment. When my prof plugged the flash drive in and opened the folder the student told him to open, he came across pages and pages of hardcore porn. He, as politely as possible, was like, "Are you sure it's in this folder?" To which the student, who was not looking at the screen, was like, "Yeah, it's in there. Keep looking." After scrolling some more, my prof called the student over to the computer and was like, "I'm pretty sure it's not in here." Of course, the student was beyond embarrassed. Will definitely never ever forget that one. P.S. Imagine if the assignment was in the porn folder. Though, like, the student came over to the screen and saw all the porn and was like, "Oh yeah. Just scroll down a little more." LMAO. Not a teacher, but working it at a school. Was told by one of the teachers that has been around for a while that 20-something years ago this place was the place to work at. Not only could you be supplied drugs by the students, but also many after-work parties turned into teacher orgies. Full stop. Home ec teacher asked a pregnant girl if she could get the placenta from her to eat. And that's about it, I think. My teachers weren't too wild by any means, I just don't wanna let this thread sink too far. Lol, not gonna believe this after this kinda blew up on me. I only just now remembered that the teacher that taught the problem kids, or slower kids, stole pornography from one of them and apparently just had a bunch in his desk that I'd hear about every so often. That's more in line with the post. Sorry. Tacked it on here though, don't wanna post again for this. A buddy of mine is a teacher in Kentucky and tells this story proudly. A couple of years ago the senior class was doing their walkthrough for graduation. Usually after the walkthrough the seniors are allowed to go home early. Well, a guy and a gal decided to skip the walkthrough so that they could go out to their car and duck, presumably while in the back seat. They decided to do anal and it led to the girl itting all over the guy's car. By the time the walkthrough had finished, the seniors were headed out to their cars and the entire graduating class walked out to the guy and gal trying to hurriedly get dressed and clean up it from the back of the car. My friend often jokes about what a ratty situation that was. I'll repost my story from a different thread. Not actually NSFW, but potentially so. I just started teaching 9th and 10th grade English, 14 years old, and Ria had a total crush on me from day one. She learned that I love, read, and write poetry, and she'd show me some of her stuff, which was actually quite good. She'd come to my room during lunch, during my planning period, and show me more and more. Being super uptight about being alone, a female student, we'd go into the hallway or library. Her poems started getting more and more erotic. However, and eventually I had to tell her that, while the writing is very creative, the content is not at all appropriate to be showing your teacher. She eventually began to tone it down and started writing spiritual poetry that I can only describe as love poems to God. Think Rumi. But the one she had me read that was obviously about me and her in a wooded cabin, loving in every way possible, with the most uncomfortable experience in the world. Not a teacher, but had this happen at my school. On a school-run community service trip to India, some girls, 16-yo, had sex with one of the leaders, 20-yo, to get him to buy them weed. Needless to say, none of them were involved with the school long after that. I subbed at a school once where we had a special ed kid who would not stop pooping in the stairwell. They had teachers escorting him from one class to another. He was theoretically supervised at all times, and yet every week or two he managed to slip away long enough to drop a deuce in the stairwell. I still pity that poor janitor. For the first 2 years of high school, while I still rode the bus, a girl that rode from the same town as me, we lived like 20 minutes from school, but the bus route made it about 45 minutes, would always sit in the back together. One day someone took her seat, so she sat in the one as me. From then on we always just sat in the same seat together. We would do flirty shit sometimes, like play the nervous game and whatnot. Well, eventually it got to the point where we basically had sex every day on the way home from school on the bus. Nobody sat that far back usually. This was before there were cameras on the bus, etc. She would get on top, facing forward on the bus in the spot she normally sat in, so it would look like she was just sitting up, so the bus driver wouldn't get suspicious if she was sitting higher up above where I normally sit. Lol. So yeah, sex on the bus. We never used condoms because we didn't know how to get them at the time. We were like 14 or some shit. I can't remember. The fact that she never got pregnant from this still baffles me to this day. Maybe she was on birth control. I don't know. We never dated. It was like a casual sex type of thing. We were just friends and we haven't talked since high school.